All right, let's go ahead and begin. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to HTML Basics. We'd like to start by introducing ourselves. My name is Malen, and we have Hannah assisting with the chat, as well as Meredith assisting with any Zoom-related questions. Before we get started, we wanted to go over some Zoom features. Your mic and video have been muted and turned off. You'll be able to use the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you select the chat icon, a box should pop up over to the side. If you have any questions, we do ask that you type it into the chat, as we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So today we're going to cover some of the basics of HTML. Anything outside the scope of that will not be covered. And we'll also be emailing you a recording of this presentation. So if you wanted to take notes, you can, but if you miss anything, that is okay. We'll start by going over the basic structure of a web page and defining what HTML is. We'll look at the software that's needed along with the basic syntax of HTML. We'll also look at some of the basic elements used, such as our headings, paragraphs, lists, images, and links. I'll break down an HTML document line by line, and then I'll demo an online code editor using what we've learned today. Let's begin by looking at the basic structure of a web page. There are various types of websites, such as e-commerce sites, government sites, blogs, photo portfolios, etc. And while they all vary in purpose, the structure and foundation of web development is the same. When you look at the basic structure of a website, you'll notice that there are 3 layers. You have your HTML, which provides the content. You have your CSS, which provides the presentation of the web page. And then you have your JavaScript, which covers how the web page behaves. Now that we have a basic understanding of the different layers of a website, let's define what HTML is. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's used to create web pages and websites. HTML is not a programming language, rather it is a markup language. So a markup language annotates a document to control the layout of the page. And HTML tells the browser what is on the page, such as a heading or a paragraph. So it provides that structure. When an HTML document loads in a browser, the browser reads that document line by line, starting from the top of the document all the way down to the bottom. There are 2 things that you need to create an HTML document. You need a web browser to view your HTML and a text editor to create your HTML document. While traditionally you would want to download an open source text editor for creating your HTML documents, as a beginner, you can play around with online code editors. These are editors that are built into the browser. They're super user-friendly and quick in getting you started. As an introduction, you can start out with an online editor such as codepen.io, just to test out the waters, and then move on to an open source editor like Visual Studio Code that you would then need to download to your computer. Alternatively, if you're using a Windows computer, you can use Notepad, and if you're on a Mac, you can use TextEdit. In this program, we're going to use codepen.io. Let's take a look at some of the syntax. HTML syntax consists of elements and tags. An HTML element is a component of an HTML document. It is the markup that you use to give meaning to the HTML document. There are several different types of elements, such as paragraphs and headings. You're able to nest most HTML elements, and what this means is that an element can contain other elements. For example, you can nest a link element within a paragraph element. Also, most HTML elements, not all, but most, are written with a start tag, would look like this, and an end tag. These tags are used to mark the start and end of an element. To create the tags, you use a left angle bracket, then the element name, and then a right angle bracket. this makes the opening tag. A closing tag has a left angle bracket, a forward slash, the element name, and then a right angle bracket. Oftentimes, the words element and tag are used interchangeably to mean the same thing. However, the key difference is that tags are they're the opening and closing punctuation needed to create elements. And most elements contain the start tag, the content, and then the end tag, while other elements only contain an opening tag because all of the information that's needed is contained in the tag itself. In HTML, all elements have a default display value. They're either block elements or inline elements. And a block element pretty much takes up the entire space, the entire width of space available, and it starts on a new line. An example of a block element includes headings and paragraphs. And inline elements don't start on a new line, rather they only take up whatever space is needed. And a great example of this is a link, an anchor element that allows you to embed links into your web page. So here's an example that illustrates the syntax of elements and the use of tags. This is the paragraph element, and it uses an opening tag along with a closing tag. As previously mentioned, there are several different types of elements. Let's take a look at our first element, headings. Headings range in size from 1 to 6 and are formatted as H1, an example here, all the way to an H6. While headings vary in text size, you don't use headings for their size. If you want to change the size of any text on a web page, you normally do it through CSS. You use headings based on the structure that they provide. Think of headings as subject headings. They outline a web page and have structural meaning. An H1 heading is considered a main top-level heading. So a web page can only have one H1 heading, and often you see it as the title of the page. An H2 heading is a subsection of an H1, and then so on and so forth. And when you're using headings, it's best to use them chronologically. So you don't want to use an H2 heading without first having used an H1. And then you also don't want to use like an H5 heading without having used an H2 level heading. Here's a great example of how headings are used. This is a snapshot of the Plano Public Library's homepage. This over here on the left is the code that's used to create this H1 level heading. While there's a lot of information in this opening tag, such as this right here and this, I'd like to just draw your attention to the content of the tag itself, just the basic opening. So you have your H1, so that angle bracket and that right angle bracket, that's the opening tag. And then you have your content library, and this is what's displayed. And then you have your closing tag. Our next element is the paragraph element. Paragraphs are used to split up text into different sections on a web page. It's a good method of controlling space. It's also important to note that paragraphs can include text, images, forms, and links. You specify a paragraph element by using an opening tag and a closing tag. And so P is for paragraph. And so you have your opening, your closing, and then sandwiched in between is your content. Here's an example of the paragraph element in use. This is another snapshot taken of the Plano Public Library's Summer Learning webpage. This is the code written to display this paragraph. Again, there's a lot of information here, but what I'd like to draw your attention to is that opening tag, the closing tag, as well as the content. And that is the output.
Malin. you be able to see the heading format one more time?
Sure, let me go back. There you go. So you have that H1 opening tag, and then your H1 closing tag, and in between is the content. So this could be an H2, an H3, 4, 5, or 6, and then that would also be an H1. It would match what is within the opening tag or closing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's take a look at another important element, lists. So lists are important because they help to group information together. Some example of lists include the navigation bar of a website, a series of links to different resources or articles, or content on your main webpage. There are 3 different types of lists in HTML. We have definition lists, unordered lists, and ordered lists. Definition lists aren't commonly used unless you're grouping terms and descriptions such as glossaries. And in this presentation, we'll just focus on unordered and ordered lists. There are 2 basic parts to a list. You have the main tag that specifies what type of list it is, and then you have the individual list items. Now, list items are nested within unordered and ordered lists. And nested means that these elements are placed within another element. So you have your main unordered list, and within that is the specific list item. This creates a type of relationship tree that is often referred to as a parent and child relationship. Let's take a look at unordered lists for further clarification. An unordered list is, again, a type of list in HTML that is displayed by default as a vertical bulleted list. An unordered list is specified by using UL within opening and closing tags. But again, it's not enough to include the opening and closing tags. You have to further specify each individual list item in your list. And these items require their own opening and closing tags. And you specify them by using LI for list item. So you have your opening list item tag and your closing list item tag, and sandwiched in between is the list item itself. So this is the output, or excuse me, this is the input. So this is the code, and then this is what it would look like. So again, here's an example of the format. Notice how the list items are contained within the opening and closing UL tags. This is what we would refer to as nesting an element. And it shows a clear relationship between the main parent, which is the unordered list, and the specific list items being the children, I guess you could say, children element. Now, it's possible to nest several lists within lists depending on the need. So when you're trying to determine what type of list you should use, it's best to think about what meaning you're trying to convey by using the specific type of list. For example, does the sequence of the list items matter? If it doesn't, maybe an unordered list is the best option. But if the sequence does matter, then maybe you're better off using an ordered list. Here's a great example of an unordered list in use. This is the code that was written over here on the left to display this bulleted list that can be found on the Plano Public Library's website. I'd like to draw your attention to the opening and closing tags of the list itself, and then each list item. So you have your opening UL, so that stands for unordered list, and that closing tag. And then each list item has its own set of opening and closing tags. So January 28th is right here. Then you have February, March, and so on and so forth. And that is how it displays. An ordered list is another type of list in HTML, and by default, it's displayed as a vertical numbered list. An ordered list is specified by using OL with an opening and closing tags. Just like we saw with unordered lists, you need to specify each individual list item within your list by using the list item opening and closing tag. Again, here's an example of the format when you're creating an ordered list. So this is the input, and then this is what the output looks like on the left. So you have that numbered, the numbered list. Let's take an example. Let's take a look at, I guess, a real world example of what it looks like. This is a snapshot from the Plano Library Learns blog. And this is, you've got some instructions on how to make slime. So this code on the left was used to create this, this list of instructions. Again, there's a lot of information here, but what I would like to draw your attention to is the opening and closing tags for the ordered list, as well as the opening and closing tags right here for the specific list items. So grab a mixing bowl and gather supplies. That's one list item, and that actually turns out to be the first instruction. So,
Lynn, do you know what the :::) marker?
So that's a bit more advanced as far as they're called like pseudo elements. It's really outside the scope of this presentation. Don't worry about it. I would say right now the key thing you want to focus on is getting your that syntax down. So the opening and closing tags, and knowing that when you're making a list, you also have to have list items. Yeah, this is a bit more advanced. The key thing is that it kind of, it'll still display, it just controls a bit more of the, I want to say like I think it's the CSS, but I'm not entirely sure, but yes. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Malin.
Thank you. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to another element, images. So if you're trying to display any sort of image on a web page, you often use an image tag, which is abbreviated as IMG. And an image element is an empty element, meaning it is self-contained and does not have a closing tag. Rather, it's just one opening tag, and all the information needed is within that opening tag. In HTML, there are these things called attributes. Now, attributes are often used as a way to communicate more information, or they're used as a way to single out specific elements, a specific element, so that it can be styled a certain way in CSS and JavaScript. When it comes to images, there are two key attributes that are used. The first is the source attribute, which stands for, again, source, but it's abbreviated as SRC. So source tells the browser where the image can be located when it's loading the page. So it points to the direct file path of the image. And while the source of the image can point to the file on your computer, it can also point to files and images that are on the web. Alt is another attribute that is important to images. It stands for alternative text, and it contains a description of the image. Now, alternative text is incredibly important for accessibility, as the alt attribute provides screen readers with information about the picture itself. Here's an example of the image element in use. This snapshot is from the Summer Learning webpage on our website. This code on the left was used to create this circular image. Notice there aren't any closing tags. All of the information that's needed is written within the left and right angle brackets. It also contains the source attribute right here, as well as the alt attribute, which gives a brief description of the image that's being displayed. The last element that we're going to look at today is the anchor element. The anchor element is used to add links to your web page. For example, you can link from a page on your site to another page on your site, or you can link from your website to another website altogether. In HTML, anchor elements are specified by using opening and closing tags. They contain a key attribute called href. Now, href stands for hypertext reference, and it's an important attribute because it tells your browser what site or page it needs to go to. The format for links is as follows. You have your opening tag with your left angle bracket, the abbreviated A for anchor, then you have href equals, and then in quotations, you insert the link. And then you close that off with a right angle bracket. So that makes up the opening tag. And then your content that you'd like to be hyperlinked goes next or follows. And then at the very end, you have the closing tag, which is that left angle bracket, that /, the A, and then that right angle bracket. Here's an example of the anchor tag in use. This snapshot was taken from the Plano Public Library's Summer Learning webpage. Notice there are three links in this paragraph. So you have reading logs, personalized certificate, and Plano Library Learns. They're all hyperlinked. And on the left, you'll find three anchor tags as well. And I'd like to draw your attention to the opening and the closing tags. So you have that anchor, the href, which points to where the location of where you'll find reading logs. And then you have reading logs, and that's what is hyperlinked, and then the closing tag. So again, there's that opening tag that ends right over here, the content that is being hyperlinked, and then the closing tag. One more time, your opening tag, content that's being hyperlinked, and the closing tag. So now that we've covered some of the basics of HTML, let's take a look at the basic structure of an HTML document. So when writing HTML, we've learned that there's a basic structure that includes a series of elements and tags. Some elements have opening and closing tags, such as paragraph elements, and others do not, such as the image element. Let's take it a bit further by looking at the standard structure of that document. When you create an HTML document using a text editor, there's a standard skeleton that you have to follow. This is an example of that basic structure. This is what it looks like. It includes all of the main components needed for your browser to display the web page properly. Let's go through each line, defining the elements and why they're important. So we'll start with the first. The first line contains a declaration element. Doc type tells the browser what kind of code it's receiving. So in this case, it's HTML5, which the browser will then display. The second line, HTML, is considered a root element. All of your code needs to be written in between the opening HTML tag and the closing HTML tag. I'd also like you to, I'd like to draw your attention to this over here. This is an attribute. It's the language attribute, and it specifies what language is being used, that being English. The third line contains the head element. So this element is not to be confused with the header element we looked at earlier, or excuse me, the heading element. So within the opening and closing tags of the head element, you'll find all of the important information about the web page. This information doesn't show up on the web page. It's really just information about the page itself. So lines 4 and 5, these two lines contain meta elements, which pretty much has all of the metadata about the page, such as character set and style descriptions. Line 6 over here contains the title element. So this specifies the title for the document. Again, it doesn't appear on the web page. Rather, it's seen in the browser tab and it is seen in search engines. Line 7 is the link element. The link element is an element that links to a separate document, such as a CSS style sheet or a Google font document. It's not to be confused with the anchor element. So the link element doesn't contain a closing tag, so it's just that one opening tag. All of the information that's needed is contained within the tag itself, whereas with the anchor element that we looked at earlier, that has an opening and closing tag, and whatever's hyperlinked is sandwiched in between the two opening and closing tags. Lastly, we have the body. The body element, this is where you display, or excuse me, this is where you write all of your content, such as your headings, your paragraphs, lists, images, anchor elements, everything that is written within the body, the opening and closing tag. That's what gets displayed in the browser. So it's what people see when they land on a web page or a website. Now that we've covered the very basics of HTML, let's demo what we've learned using CodePen.io. CodePen is an online code editor that allows you to code HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can sign up for a free account or just jump in and start playing around with what you've learned. So let me go ahead and exit out of this and I'll switch to CodePen. Can you all see my screen? Hannah, are you still able to see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. All right, so this is the main site. Again, you can create an account by signing up or logging in if you already have an account, but I'm going to go ahead and just start coding. Mind you, when you start coding, nothing is actually saved until you either sign up for an account or log in, and it is free to sign up for an account. All right, so you'll notice these 3 boxes at the top. These are called pens. It's where you write your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript. The default view is where the pens are at the top, but you can change the editor layout by clicking on Change View. Your pens can either be on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. I prefer them at the top, so I'll change it back to that. What I really like about CodePen is that it's pretty straightforward. It's super easy to use. You can just, again, jump in and start playing around with what you've learned, so it's not as intimidating. And it gives you an immediate preview of what you're typing out. So there's not a lot of setup required other than signing up for an account. But if you wanted to use a more traditional text editor like VS Code, Visual Studio Code, you would need to download that. And Visual Studio Code is kind of considered like an industry standard. It's what people would use. With that being said, let's go ahead and just create a basic web page. If you have access to CodePen, you can follow along, or you can watch this video when we mail it out and follow along as well, or just, yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll start off with a heading. Before we start, I actually just wanted to say that normally when you're using a text editor, you want to have that HTML skeleton. You're declaring your document type, you have the head with all of the metadata information, and then you have your body. What's nice with CodePen, you don't need to set that up. You don't need to type that out. I think that's done on the back end. So what you have to only type out in this HTML pen is the code that the browser would see, so that a person would see when they land on your web page. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with a heading. So I have my left angle bracket. We'll start with an H1. And what I like to do is I like to go ahead and just type out the opening tag and the closing tag. So again, you have your opening with the 2 angle brackets and the element, abbreviated element name, and that closing, and that it's important to include a / in the closing tag. And for this web page, it'll just be kind of like a summary of what we learned today. HTML basics is the title. All right, there you go. There it is. And it'll tell you when you have unsaved changes. The important thing is if you're just starting to code and you don't have an account, don't hit refresh or the back button, because that'll kind of wipe out everything that you've written. Let's go ahead and add an image. So I'll create the image tag, that source attribute. So it's src equals quotation marks, and then alt for alternative text equals, and then your quotation marks and your closing tag. So I don't have an image saved on my computer at the moment that I'd like to use. If you ever find yourself in that situation, that is okay. There are sites that contain placeholder images. A site that I'm going to use is placeimg.com. And this gives you a link to use for the source. Since I know that our HTML page or our web page is about HTML, I'll select the tech category. And what I'll do is I'll just copy that link and I'll place it into the source. And knowing that it's, there it is, there's a picture. So for the alt description, I'm going to keep it pretty generic, image of a technological device. And yeah, I think that looks good. All right, so following the image, I'd like to include a paragraph. So paragraph is abbreviated to P, P is what you would use in the to specify the paragraph element. So you have your opening left angle. So you have your opening tag, which is that left angle bracket, your P, and then a right angle bracket. So that's the opening tag, and then your closing tag. And it's important in that closing tag to include that /. And then we'll write up a sentence or two. So let's see, there's several different types of websites. And let me scroll down so you can see. There you go. So that's showing up. So that's great. Websites such as etc. They all vary in purpose. And if you're following along, you can pretty much summarize what HTML is. You don't have to copy the same sentence that I'm writing. I'll use the same. How about says they are built on the same foundation. All right, I think it looks good. Let's add a period there. I'd like to include another heading. So we've already used our H1 heading, which is the main title. Let's go ahead and add an H2 heading. So opening and closing tags, and then in between you have your elements and tags. And that is what it looks like. All right. A great analogy for tags, or for tags when you're just trying to remember how to use them. Your opening tag, think of it as think of this whole thing as a sandwich. You have your opening tag, which is one slice of bread. Your closing tag is your second slice of bread, and everything in between is your content. Now, mind you, some elements, again, don't have that closing tag. So you can think of it as one slice of bread and all of the information needed is baked into that bread. Hopefully that helps. So let's see, let's write another paragraph. And sandwiched in between, HTML, syntax, elements and tags, markup, used to give meaning to the HTML document. And that is what it looks like. So we've got our H1, our image, a paragraph, which comes out to be a sentence, another subheading, our H2, another paragraph, again, which comes out to be about a sentence. And why don't we I'll include another paragraph. There are two types of lists. We have our ordered and unordered. Following this paragraph, I would like to create an unordered list. I'm actually going to create another sentence to kind of set it up. So here's an example of an unordered list. I'm going to close that paragraph tag. And let me scroll down so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so now let's create our list, our unordered list. So unordered list is UL, and then you need your closing UL tag. And then you need your specific list items. So I'm going to go ahead and create the opening and closing tag for that. And in between, I'll just do item A. Let's see what that looks like. There you go, item A. And let's create another list item. Okay. Scroll down so you see what that looks like. Let's create an unordered list. So I'll write a sentence about, just to set it up. Here's an example of an, did I say unordered? I meant ordered. Here's an example of an ordered list. Okay, and I need that closing tag for the sentence. Let's go ahead and create our ordered list. Got your opening tag and your closing tag. And then in between the list items. All right, let's see, we'll do item A and item B. Let's scroll down and see what it looks like. Oh, that's weird. So normally this would display as one item A to item B. Let's take a look and see what I'm missing or what I did. okay, I see a typo. I have in my opening tag for item A, I have that LIL. Well, the browser doesn't recognize that as anything. Let me delete that second L, scroll down. Okay, perfect. But then you have 2 and then 3. So what's missing in this element is that closing tag. Let's see if that fixes it. Perfect. All right, so that fixed that. Let's go ahead, and you'll find that when you are coding, you might make a whole bunch of typos, and it's just a matter of kind of going through your code and seeing where there's a typo and fixing it and seeing if it displays how you intended. All right, so we have our main heading, our image, our paragraphs, got that subheading, our lists. Let's go ahead and I'll use another heading, an H3 heading. And I'll label this as resources. Perfect. Okay. Now, create a paragraph. Can't forget that closing / in the closing tag. So, if you'd like to learn more about HTML, please check out LinkedIn Learning and Mozilla Developer. Okay, so I would like to create a hyperlink for LinkedIn Learning and Mozilla Developer Network. So in order to create that hyperlink, you have to use that anchor element. Remember that anchor element has an opening and closing tag. And so it's left angle bracket, href equals quotation marks, and in between the quotation marks, I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. You'll insert the address that you'd like to, or the web page that you would like to hyperlink. Can't forget the closing tag, or excuse me, the closing right angle bracket. So here's my opening tag over here. And then I need the closing tag. And let's scroll down and see what that looks like. Perfect. So it is hyperlinked. Okay, and we're going to do the same for Mozilla Developer Network. So my left angle bracket, A space href equals double quotations, and in between the quotation marks, I need the site that I'm going to be linking to. Okay, and then following the quotation mark, you need that right angle bracket to close that opening tag. And then you also need your closing tag. So following the word network, I'm going to do a left angle bracket / a right angle bracket. And actually insert a period there. So let's see if that hyperlinks. Perfect. So LinkedIn Learning gets hyperlinked as well as Mozilla Developer Network. So this is just a demo of what you can do. I know it looks a little janky, but that is okay. Pretty much the basics. When you learn CSS and JavaScript, if that is something that you're interested in learning, you can input all of the code there and you'll be able to see a preview of what it looks like. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll jump back into the presentation, into the slides. Okay. So as I mentioned, we just demoed codepen.io, but there are many other text editors that you can use. I've also mentioned Visual Studio Code. There's also Brackets and Atom. These are all programs you'll need to download to your computer. I believe Brackets and Atom, I believe these are free as well. Visual Studio Code is free, so you don't have to pay for that. Yeah, I'd also like to highlight some resources. Mozilla Developer Network is super awesome. There's a lot of information on the site that pertains to HTML, but also CSS and JavaScript. It's created by developers, so you're getting really good information there. There are info guides, tutorials. Another site I'd like to highlight is LinkedIn Learning. If you have a Plano Public Library card, you can access LinkedIn Learning for free. You just need your library card and your login PIN. And there's so many webinars, but the one that I would suggest is HTML Basics, Essential Training by Jen Simmons. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you for taking the time to attend our virtual program. You can find more resources on our website, planolibrary.org, or as well as our website or our blog, planolibrarylearns.org. So let's open it up to a Q&A. Are there any questions?
Nothing yet in chat, but I will keep an eye out.
Okay, awesome. Another resource that we have, like if you can't think of any questions now, but you come across something in your learning, your journey, you can always book a librarian. That is a resource that is available to you. You get a 30-minute one-on-one session with a librarian who can point you towards additional resources if you'd like. So that is an option. Hannah has linked to our library site and book a librarian. So if you're wanting to do that, you can do that. You'll find it under the About section. It'll be planolibrary.org. Under About, you'll be able to see that book a librarian option. And if you click on that, I believe a form should pop up. I wanted to show you, before we head out, I wanted to show you a really cool thing that you could do just to kind of like figure out how a site is, what kind of code is used to create a site. Let me go to our main webpage. This is, you're able to do this, I believe, in any browser. If you right click your mouse and you select inspect, that pulls up pretty much all of the code used to display what is on the web page. It looks very intimidating, but it is there if you are the type of person that kind of likes to just dive in and figure out, what does this mean? This is an option. The first icon, select an element in the page to inspect it. When you click on that and you hover over something, it will tell you what element is being used. And then it also kind of breaks down into like CSS. So that library element, you'll find the HTML here. And then over here, it breaks down even further, like giving you the CSS that's used and a whole bunch of information. So it is intimidating, especially when you are a beginner, but it kind of does help when you get the basics down and you can kind of identify like your H1 and like a, an image or something like that. So that's always fun to play with. Another thing is if you go to the 3 dots in the corner, I'm using Chrome. If you go down to settings, actually it's not settings. If you go down to more tools, you can select developer tools. And that pulls up something that looks similar to the inspect feature, but in your developer tools, you can make a few changes. The changes aren't, they're not permanent. It's just what you see, and you can play around with it some more that way. So hopefully that's just some more information. Hopefully not, it hasn't been information overload. But yeah, so any more questions?
No questions in chat.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for attending. Really appreciate your time. Hope to see you again. All right.